A black diner owner served coffee to a Hell's Angel everyone else avoided. Moments later, two police officers stormed in and started hurling insults at both of them. When they reached for their guns, the owner stepped in. She stood her ground, defended the biker, and threw the officers out of her diner. That single act made the whole town turn against her. But what happened next shocked everyone. Ruthie was the kind of woman you'd miss if you didn't look twice. Tall, with weather-worn skin the color of molasses and eyes that could read the weather in your soul. Her late husband used to say she could spot a liar before their mouth opened. But he'd been gone 5 years now, and in that time, the town had grown colder. Or maybe Ruthie had just stopped pretending otherwise. The diner, Bell's Place, sat like a chipped tooth on Main Street. It had survived the textile mill closing, 2 floods, and a mayoral scandal. But these days, it barely scraped by. Locals came for coffee, not conversation. They didn't like that Ruthie didn't hide who she was. A black woman, a business owner, a voice that didn't tremble when silence was easier. That morning, she flipped chairs down from tables and started the coffee pot, humming low under her breath. Gospel soft and sad. The sun was barely breaking through when she saw him. Leather jacket, dust-caked boots, beard thick as steel wool. He parked his Harley beside the diner's window, engine rattling like a cough from God. She knew the type. The patches on his vest weren't for decoration. Hell's Angels. Most in Darlington Ridge would have crossed the street. He stepped in slow. 6'2", maybe older than he looked. Everyone in the diner went still. Forks hovered midair. Conversations died mid-sentence. One of the regulars, Pete, who wore his Confederate flag hat with more pride than common sense, muttered loud enough for the room to hear. "Well, we got ourselves a visitor from the underworld." The biker didn't flinch, just looked around. Tired. Hungry. Ruthie didn't blink. "You want coffee or judgment first?" she asked, voice smooth as worn leather. The man cracked a grin. "Just coffee, ma'am." She poured him a cup herself. No fuss. No fear. That's when the sheriff walked in, 2 deputies trailing behind like shadows in blue. Sheriff Mott had a face that looked carved from concrete. He spotted the biker and didn't hesitate. "You," he barked. "Hands on the counter. Now." The diner froze. The biker didn't move. Ruthie, still behind the counter, calmly placed the coffee pot down. "No, sir," she said quietly. "Not in here." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Ruthie, you don't want to get involved in this." "He's drinking coffee," she said, stepping forward. "And he'll finish it in peace. You can wait outside like everyone else who doesn't know how to knock." Mott stepped closer. "This man's got warrants." "Then serve him a summons," she replied, standing her ground. "But you won't lay hands on anyone in my diner. Not while I'm still standing." And just like that, a line was drawn. The sheriff spat on the floor and turned. "Suit yourself. But don't come crying when he burns your place down." When they left, the biker looked at Ruthie like he was seeing something rare. "You didn't have to do that," he said. She nodded. "I know." The bell over the door jingled again as another customer left early. Then another. And by the end of the hour, the diner was nearly empty. But Ruthie just wiped the counter clean, humming that same slow gospel. The silence in Bell's Place was thick as syrup. Ruthie wiped down the empty table by the window, her motions calm but deliberate, as if her hands could wash away the tension lingering in the air. The few customers who hadn't stormed out were regulars who usually filled the place with harmless gossip. Now, they sat stiff, avoiding eye contact, stirring their drinks like the silence might drown them. The biker, he hadn't offered a name, sat quietly at the counter, cradling his coffee like it was a small fire in a snowstorm. He hadn't touched the biscuit Ruthie had slid in front of him, just sat with those heavy eyes and watched her move, like he was waiting for something. Or maybe just bracing for it. It didn't take long. By 9 a.m., the town's gossip vine had bloomed in full. The mayor's secretary, whose husband happened to be the sheriff's cousin, posted something cryptic on Facebook. "Some folks don't know where they belong anymore. SMH. And by 10:15, a local church deacon walked into the diner and told Ruthie, real soft and polite like, You know folks are talking. Protecting criminals ain't Christian. She looked him square in the eye. Neither is leaving a man in the cold without a chance to explain himself. The deacon's cheeks flushed red, and he left without his usual slice of pie. By lunch, half the day's take was gone. So were the teachers who used to come in on their breaks. So were the tips. So were the smiles. Ruthie didn't say a word about it. Just kept the place clean, the coffee hot, and the doors open. But the quiet crept in heavier than before. Lonelier. The biker watched her closely. Finally, he spoke. You're catching heat 'cause of me. Ruthie nodded once. That's how fire works. He looked like he wanted to say something more, but he just let out a breath through his nose and turned back to his cup. A few minutes later, he stood, pulled out a crumpled 20 from his wallet, and placed it on the counter. For the coffee. And the courage. Ruthie didn't take it. Just looked at him. You didn't do anything wrong. He stared at the bill. Then at her. Yeah, well, that don't usually matter. She finally took the money, folding it into the tip jar. Don't usually, she said. But maybe someday it will. He nodded. Just once. Then walked out. The bell jingled. And Ruthie was alone again. She stood behind the counter, staring out the window at the street that had gone quiet. The kind of quiet that comes before something breaks. And she knew, deep in her bones, that the hardest part hadn't come yet. That night, Darlington Ridge turned its back on Ruthie Bell. It didn't come with shouting or threats. No torches. No mobs. It came with silence. Cold, deliberate silence. The grocery store didn't place her usual weekly produce order. Said the supplier must have missed it. The church Ruthie had cooked for every Easter pulled her from the volunteer list. No explanation, just a polite thank you email. And when she stopped by the hardware store to pick up a light bulb for the flickering, open sign, the owner, a man who once helped install her ceiling fans, pretended not to see her. She left the store empty-handed. Outside, autumn winds kicked up the yellow leaves in tight little spirals, like the town was stirring something under the surface. Her only comfort was the quiet whir of her truck's heater and the rhythm of the gospel station on the radio. But even that felt thinner now. Like even the music knew she'd been marked. Marked for standing up. For offering dignity to a stranger. Back home, she sat at her kitchen table with the day's earnings, a little over $30, and stared at her reflection in the dark window. Her hair, silvered at the edges. Her hands, calloused from years of lifting plates, fixing broken stools, doing it all alone. She could feel it. That old ache. Not just in her body, but deep down. That ache of being othered. Of being watched through a lens of suspicion while others got the benefit of the doubt. She remembered her daddy telling her once, "Baby, doing the right thing don't mean folks will clap for you. Sometimes, it means they close the door and don't open it again." Well, the doors were closing. But Ruthie had never needed anyone to hold them open for her. Still, she was tired. Tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. She pressed her palms together and whispered a prayer, not for herself, but for the town. For the people who could see a patch on a man's vest and not the hunger in his eyes. 3 days passed. Not a word from the man in the leather vest. Ruthie didn't expect one. People like him, people on the run, or worse, exiled by their own kind, didn't usually circle back. Life taught her that some debts are felt but never spoken. But on the 4th day, at dawn, a single envelope slid under the diner's front door. She found it while mopping the entryway, almost missed it under the rug. No name, just her own spelled carefully across the front. Ms. Bell. Inside was a note, written in a surprisingly elegant hand. You didn't know me. Still stood up for me. I was on my way out of this world, honest to God. But your kindness changed something. I'll pay it back. One way or another. Red. She read it 3 times. Red, she whispered. Of course that's his name. She folded the note, pressed it between the pages of her prayer book, and went back to work. The town hadn't let up. If anything, the freeze had deepened. Someone graffitied her back alley door with the words, Traders DN. In white paint. Ruthie didn't flinch. She scrubbed it off before opening that morning. No calls. No customers. Just her and the hum of the coffee machine and that damned flickering light above the register. And yet, she waited. Not just for Red. For anything. A break in the cold. A voice to say, "You did right." But it never came. Not from the town. Not yet. By late afternoon, a rain rolled in. One of those slow, relentless drizzles that soaked through coats and plans alike. Ruthie stood at the front window, arms crossed, watching raindrops race each other down the glass. In the distance, headlights blinked past like fireflies, none turning in, none stopping. The diner sat quiet. Too quiet. She whispered aloud to the empty room. "Lord, I hope that coffee was worth it." Just then, the wind slammed the dumpster lid shut behind the alley, and the echo rattled the window pane. She didn't jump. She just turned away, wiped the counter, and kept the lights on. It began with a low rumble. Not the kind from clouds or quakes. No, this was heavier, deeper. It came like a warning through the pavement, vibrating the salt shakers on Ruthie's tables. She was refilling the sugar jars when she felt it in her feet. A shiver in the bones, steady and growing. The storm hadn't passed after all. She stepped out from behind the counter, wiped her hands on her apron, and peered through the rain-fogged window. Then she saw them. Headlights. Dozens of them. One by one, bikes rolled down Main Street in slow procession. Their engines weren't roaring. They were growling low, synchronized like a funeral march. The kind that didn't ask for permission. Ruthie's heart kicked up in her chest. By the time the first Harley parked outside the diner, 6 more had lined up behind it. By the end of the minute, she counted nearly 30. Men and women, faces obscured by helmets, leather jackets soaked dark from the rain. At the center was Red. He pulled off his helmet slowly, rain dripping down his temple. His eyes locked on the window. On her. He didn't smile, just nodded. She moved to the door and unlocked it, though they hadn't knocked. The bell chimed as he stepped inside, boots leaving wet prints across her tile floor. The others followed, quietly, respectfully. No noise. No wild laughter. Just presence. Ruthie's hands trembled slightly, whether from nerves or something deeper, she couldn't say. Red stood in front of her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said, voice low but sure, "Told you I'd pay it back." She looked past him, at the room now filled with leather, denim, and faces bearing the weight of stories most people never wanted to hear. "Didn't expect a parade," she said quietly. Red chuckled, "Just once. Ain't no parade. It's a promise kept." He looked around. "They heard what you did. The whole chapter did." And then, as if rehearsed, one of the bikers reached into his vest and placed an envelope on the counter. Then another. Then another. Ruthie looked down, each one marked for Belle's place. Cash. Bills thick with rain and grit, and something even rarer, respect. Red met her eyes again. "We don't forget kindness, even when the world does." And just like that, the diner wasn't empty anymore. From outside, it looked like a riot was brewing inside Belle's place. Fogged-up windows. A sea of black leather and tattoos. Thunder still rumbling from the street where motorcycles idled like wolves at the edge of the woods. But inside, it was quiet, respectful. Ruthie moved through the diner like she always had, steady, with that same old blue apron tied at the waist. Only now, each table was full. Of strangers. Of outcasts. Of people who looked like trouble, but sat with straight backs and open hands. She poured coffee, took orders, even smiled once when a lanky man with silver braids tried to flirt by complimenting her cornbread. "Ma'am," he'd said, "this here tastes like God told an angel how to bake, and she taught me shame in one bite." She didn't laugh, but her eyes softened. Then she saw it. Across the street, behind the fogged-up glass of the barber shop, faces. Locals. Watching. Whispering. Their silhouettes blurred behind the condensation, like ghosts peeking in on the living. Ruthie didn't flinch. She picked up a fresh pot of coffee and made her way to Red's table near the back. He was sitting with 2 other bikers, one a quiet Latina with a scar that ran down her cheek like a ribbon, The other a bearded man with tired eyes who hadn't spoken since he sat down. "Refills?" she asked. Red held out his cup. "You all right?" She didn't answer right away. "Just poured." "I'm used to being alone," she said after a moment. "But not watched like this." He nodded slowly. "They don't understand it. This," he gestured to the room. "Kindness that ain't owed. They think I did it to make a point," Ruthie muttered. "Like I wanted trouble. Then they don't know what real decency looks like," the woman at the table said, her voice low but sharp. Red looked around the diner, at the people he rode in with. People hardened by life, by labels, by years of running. "They know what it's like to be judged from the outside," he said. "Same way this town looks at you." Ruthie met his gaze. For the first time in days, she felt understood. Not pitted, not praised, just seen. Then, from the window, a flash of movement. Sheriff Mott, watching, and not from his cruiser this time, but from the sidewalk. Rain dripping from his hat, arms crossed, face blank. Their eyes met. His lip curled, and he walked away. By morning, everyone knew. The entire county, it seemed, had caught wind of what happened at Bell's place. Rumors spilled faster than coffee on a nervous hand. Some said Ruthie had joined a gang. Others claimed the diner was now a front for outlaw activity. A few even suggested she was harboring fugitives. Proof, they said, of what happens when you let the wrong kind of woman run a business. The sheriff wasn't subtle about it either. That morning, 2 squad cars idled just down the street from the diner. Officers leaned against the hoods, sipping gas station coffee, staring down anyone who entered. "Just keeping an eye on things," Mott told the local paper when asked. But the message was clear: intimidation. Ruthie didn't flinch. She opened her doors like always, brewed her coffee, scrambled eggs, let the bell chime and the day begin. And people still came. Not townsfolk. The bikers stayed, at least a dozen of them, rotating shifts like sentinels. They paid for every cup, cleaned up after themselves. One even offered to fix the diner's flickering neon sign, his calloused fingers delicate around the fragile wires. They weren't loud. They were loyal. Red had posted up near the counter, flipping through a tattered paperback and sipping coffee like it was communion. Every now and then, he'd look at Ruthie, not to check on her, but to stand with her in silence. Then the fire marshal came, a short man in a raincoat with a clipboard and forced smile. "Routine inspection," he said, eyes scanning everything. He didn't find a thing. But the message? Same as the sheriff's. Ruthie walked him out. "You tell Mott," she said calmly. "If he wants to shut me down, he better bring more than paperwork and men who can't look me in the eye." The marshal blinked, then scurried off like a dog without a bone. When she turned back inside, Red stood at the doorway, arms crossed. "You good?" he asked. She hesitated, just long enough to make it real. "I ain't scared," she said. But her voice had a shake in it that wasn't there yesterday. Red nodded. "Doesn't mean you gotta stand alone." That night, as she locked up, Ruthie looked down the street at the darkened homes and silent porches. The town had made its choice. But so had she. The next blow didn't come from the sheriff or a citation. It came from her bank. A letter. Thin envelope. Standard envelope white. But inside, words that cut deeper than any slur. Due to recent concerns regarding community safety and public perception, First Southern Union Bank will be reevaluating its commercial lending policy as it relates to Bell's Place. A review of your business loan is now pending. Further updates to follow. Ruthie read it 3 times. Not because she didn't understand it, but because she did. She had 2 years left on that loan. Paid on time. Always. With pride. This wasn't about money. It was punishment. By proxy. She stared at the bank's letterhead for a long moment. The early morning light slipping in through her kitchen window like it, too, was ashamed. A minute later, she was in the diner, unlocking the door, flipping the lights, checking the stove pilot. Movement smooth, but a little slower now. Like the weight of survival was settling into her bones. At 7:03 a.m., Red came in. Alone today. No entourage. No patch. just a battered denim jacket and eyes that had seen war of some kind. "You all right?" he asked the moment he saw her. "No," she replied simply. "But that ain't ever stopped me." She handed him the letter without a word. He read it in silence. When he was done, he placed it on the counter and looked at her. Really looked. "They're trying to bleed you out." "I know." "You got family?" he asked. "None that come around." He nodded. "You do now?" She looked at him. "You don't know me," she said quietly. "What I've done. What I carry." "I know enough," Red replied. "You carry people who don't deserve you. That's more than most." Just then, a soft knock at the door. Ruthie turned. It was a young woman, early 20s maybe, with a camera bag and a notepad. Hair in a messy bun. She cracked the door and peeked in. "Ms. Bell? I'm from Channel 8 News out of Asheville. Would you be willing to talk?" Ruthie didn't answer, just stared. Red stood and stepped beside her, hands relaxed but ready. The woman raised her hands. I heard what happened. About the sheriff. The bikers. You standing up. We want to tell your side." Ruthie looked at Red, then back at the reporter. After a long pause, she stepped aside and opened the door wide. "Come in," she said. "But I ain't telling a story for pity." "Good," the reporter replied, stepping inside. "We're not here for pity. We're here for truth." The young reporter set her camera down on the counter like it was made of glass. Nervous energy clung to her like perfume. Eager, idealistic, just green enough to believe stories like this could change the world. Ruthie watched her set up, arms crossed. Red stood in the background, silent sentinel. "What's your name?" Ruthie asked. "Jules," the reporter said. "Julianne, technically, but nobody calls me that except my mother when I'm late to church." Ruthie raised an eyebrow. "You go to church?" "Not lately," Jules admitted with a crooked smile. "But I believe in what's right." "Believing ain't the same as standing," Ruthie said, pouring herself a coffee. "You learn that yet?" Jules' smile faltered, but she didn't shrink. "I'm here, aren't I?" Ruthie nodded, slowly. "I suppose you are." The interview was short. Ruthie didn't give speeches, didn't try to defend herself. She spoke like a woman with nothing to prove. "I serve coffee to a hungry man," she said. "Same as I've done for 20 years. Why do you think the town turned on you?" Jules asked. Ruthie sipped her coffee. "Because kindness makes cowards nervous. They'd rather think I was crazy or corrupt than admit they wouldn't have done the same." "And the bikers?" Jules glanced at Red. "They're people," Ruthie replied. "Flawed, fierce, grateful. You show someone dignity when they don't expect it, and they remember." Red gave a quiet nod. Jules packed up after 20 minutes, eyes shining with something Ruthie couldn't quite name. Gratitude? Admiration? Hope? Before she left, Jules hesitated at the door. "You think the town will come around?" Ruthie didn't answer right away. Then, "Only if they see me as more than the lie they built in their heads." Jules paused. "I think you just gave me the headline." "Use something honest," Ruthie said. "Not just something that'll trend." The bell chimed as she left. And for a brief second, the diner felt like it used to. Before the silence, before the judgment, before a cup of coffee turned into a line drawn in the soul of a town. The news segment aired that evening, 3 minutes and 46 seconds long. It wasn't flashy. No dramatic music or sensational headlines. Just Ruthie. In her apron. In her truth. She spoke with the kind of quiet strength that didn't beg to be understood. It simply demanded to be heard. The footage cut between shots of the diner, the rain-streaked street, and a few blurred images of the bikers sitting in solemn conversation. The final line played just before the credits rolled. "I didn't stand up to be remembered. I stood up because it was right. That's all." Phones lit up across Darlington Ridge like fireflies at dusk. Some locals turned the channel. Others sat in stunned silence, their coffee going cold in their hands. And a few, just a few, felt something they didn't expect. Shame. At 7:04 p.m., Ruthie's landline rang. She didn't answer. At 7:12, a knock came at her back door. Red opened it. It was the baker from 2 blocks down. Nervous, clutching a warm paper bag like a peace offering. Thought she might want these, he mumbled. Fresh biscuits. Ruthie took them without a word. But her eyes held something fragile. A crack in the armor. At 8:16, another knock. Then another. A florist. A retired teacher. Even old Pete, the one with the Confederate cap, left a pie on the step and walked away without looking back. And just after closing, someone slipped an envelope through the mail slot. No name. Just 4 words scribbled across the front. You were never alone. Inside, $500 in cash. Ruthie sat at the counter, staring at the pile of small kindnesses forming like bricks after a storm. The diner was still empty, but it didn't feel hollow. Red walked up beside her and set down 2 mugs of tea. Not coffee. World's still watching, he said. Ruthie nodded slowly. Let him. The change didn't come with applause. It came in whispers. 2 days after the news aired, a mother and her teenage son came into Belle's place just after the morning rush. She didn't say much, just ordered eggs and toast, and left a $10 tip on a $6 bill. The boy looked around nervously before saying, My uncle's a cop. Said you were trouble. But I watched the clip. You're not. Ruthie didn't smile. Just gave a soft, eat your eggs before they get cold. Later that afternoon, a man from the town council stopped by, Jack Rollins, the same man who voted against naming the local library after a black teacher 2 years ago. He stepped inside with a look that said he wasn't sure why his legs had brought him there. Thought I'd see for myself, he mumbled. What all the fuss is about. She poured him coffee. Black. No words exchanged. He drank it in silence. Left a 20 on the counter. Didn't take change. That night, Ruthie found a hand-painted sign leaned against the outside wall. Thick wooden board, white lettering. You stood for him. We stand with you. It wasn't signed, but she didn't need it to be. The town wasn't healed. Not even close. But something had cracked. The certainty that silence would win was no longer gospel. And in the quiet moments before dawn, Ruthie stood alone in the diner with the lights off and whispered to no one in particular. I think they're starting to see me now. It was Saturday when the engines returned. Louder this time. Not threatening, celebratory. One after another, chrome and steel rolled into Darlington Ridge like thunder with purpose. 40 bikes. Maybe 50. Gleaming in the sun like coins in a wishing well. Some had flags, patched leather, colors from distant chapters. Women in mirrored shades. Men with lined faces and eyes that had lived long past forgiveness. They didn't stop at the edge of town this time. They owned the road. Locals came out to see. Some with folded arms. Others with phones. 1 or 2 with half-formed apologies trembling behind their teeth. The procession wound through Main Street and stopped, every last bike, in front of Belle's place. Ruthie stepped outside before the bell could chime. Red took off his helmet first, but he didn't speak. He just pointed, and one by one, each biker laid something at her feet. Groceries, toolboxes, gift cards, gasoline vouchers, envelopes fat with cash, a used but pristine neon sign that read, Open, in cursive blue. And finally, a battered wooden stool with the words reserved for Ruthie carved by hand into the seat. The crowd across the street grew. Jules was back too, phone out, face unreadable. Red finally walked up the steps and said, loud enough for every ear in Darlington Ridge, this woman stood alone when it counted. So now, we make sure she don't ever have to again. A long silence followed. And then, applause. From the barber. From the retired schoolteacher. From the mailman who used to cross the street when Ruthie walked by. Even from Pete. His hat was gone. The next morning, Ruthie found flowers on her doorstep. Not the store-bought kind. Wildflowers, fresh-picked, damp with dew, tied with a rubber band like someone had scrambled to gather them before courage faded. No note. Just color. Just effort. Inside, the diner buzzed with a kind of electricity that hadn't been there in years. Locals came in, slower now, testing the waters, lingering at the edges of booths they hadn't sat in for months. Some offered stammered apologies, disguised as compliments. Best coffee in the county, Ruthie. Place looks cleaner than I remember. Others didn't say a word. They just showed up. Saturday. 8 tipped more than usual, and not a single one asked about Red or his people. Not anymore. Because now, they were part of the story. The real story. That evening, a group of high school students came by after rehearsal. All of them black and brown. Kids who once walked past Belle's place without looking in. Too aware. Too unwelcome. Now, they ordered milkshakes. And laughed. And stayed too long. Ruthie watched them from behind the counter, her dish towel still in hand. Red leaned over and whispered, "Looks like home again." She didn't answer, just kept drying that cup. But her hands were trembling. Not from fear. From relief. From the realization that the thing she thought she'd lost, that bridge between her and the place she refused to abandon, was being rebuilt. One honest act at a time. By Monday, even the sheriff couldn't ignore it. Belle's place wasn't just open, it was thriving. Cars lined up down Main Street. Locals. Outsiders. Bikers still kept a presence, but they no longer felt like protection, they felt like family. Mott drove by slow that morning, window down, sunglasses hiding his eyes. He didn't stop, just watched. Ruthie met his gaze through the glass. Didn't wave, didn't blink, just stood there, blue apron tied tight, a queen behind her counter. That evening, he sent a deputy instead, young, nervous, barely old enough to shave. He came in holding a folded piece of paper and a brown envelope. "Sheriff says it was all just a misunderstanding," the deputy mumbled, sliding the envelope across the counter. Inside, an apology letter, typed, and a voucher refunding Ruthie's $450 health inspection fee. Ruthie read it once, then twice, then calmly folded it in half and slid it back across the counter. "You tell the sheriff," she said, "some things can't be refunded." The deputy flushed, nodded, and left without another word. Red, watching from the far booth, chuckled. "You handled that better than I would've." Ruthie didn't look at him, just wiped the counter. Forgiveness don't mean forgetting. She looked out the window at the sheriff's cruiser, now parked halfway down the block, lights off. "But it does mean I won't let bitterness steal what I built." Red nodded slowly. "That's power right there." Ruthie didn't smile, but her hands had stopped shaking. It rained that night, soft and steady. The kind of rain that made the world feel quieter, cleaner. Belle's place closed early, not from lack of business, but because Ruthie needed time to think. Alone, she stood by the window long after the last dish was washed, her reflection staring back at her in the glass. Outside, the neon open sign flickered, casting a soft blue halo around her face. Red had left hours earlier, riding off into the dusk with a promise to return next week. "For pie," he said, but they both knew it was more than that. Now, the diner hummed with stillness. Ruthie walked over to the front table, the one where Red had sat that first morning. She ran her hand along its edge. The wood was worn smooth from years of elbows, coffee cups, and hard conversations. And beneath it, she'd taped something earlier that day. Red's note. "You didn't know me. Still stood up for me." She unfolded it again, smoothing it out with her fingertips. A tear slid down her cheek. But it wasn't sorrow. It was something softer. Something like peace. The bell over the door jingled once. Not from a visitor, but from the wind as she cracked it open to let the rain-sweet air drift in. Behind her, the walls of Belle's place stood stronger than ever. And in that moment, Ruthie understood something deeper than headlines, stares, or silence. Kindness planted roots, even in hard soil. And hers had just begun to bloom. Months passed. The bikers still came, though not in thunderous herds anymore. Just enough to remind the town that family could be forged, not just inherited. Belle's place thrived. New tables, a fresh coat of paint, a community bulletin board that once hung empty now cluttered with flyers, choir nights, fundraisers, tutoring offers, AA meetings. People no longer just ate there. They belonged there. Even the mayor stopped by once. He tried to buy lunch. Ruthie let him pay double, and she made him wait. But she served him with the same grace she offered everyone. That was her revolution. In quiet defiance, Ruthie had turned a diner into a sanctuary, a battleground into a garden. The old fears, the whispers, the glances, the pressure to shrink, hadn't disappeared. But now they were outnumbered. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, painting the windows in gold, a little girl with brown skin and bright eyes tugged on Ruthie's apron. "Are you the lady who made the mean police go away?" Ruthie bent down, eye to eye. "No, baby," she said, voice warm. "I just made it harder for them to stay mean." The girl beamed, then skipped back to her mother. Red stool still sat by the window, carved name untouched. He hadn't visited in a few weeks, but he'd written twice. The last letter ended with, "I ride easier now, knowing there's a place like yours in the world. A place where decency doesn't ask what you look like first." That night, Ruthie turned the lights off one by one, locked the door, stepped outside under a sky littered with stars, and she whispered to the darkness, "Let them remember me not for coffee, but for courage." In a world where judgment often walks faster than kindness, Ruthie Bell stood still, not to resist, but to root. She showed that decency doesn't need a title, that standing up doesn't require a crowd, and that sometimes all it takes to tilt a town back toward justice is one woman in a blue apron who chooses not to look away. This is the story of Bell's Place, but it could be any place, and maybe, just maybe, it already is. We just have to decide which side of the counter we want to stand on. Thank you for watching. Subscribe me and hit the notification bell to not miss new stories. Bye.